member to the commission. We had a vacancy with Christopher Mons from Utah State that had been filling the position for conservation, but then he retired from that position, mainly because we had entered into this contract with Utah State for their consulting services, and he wanted to avoid any potential conflicts there. And
recording in progress.
Okay, or the appearance of such, and so there was a vacancy on that conservation position on the board, and so after getting a few recommendations and meeting with a few people, I felt like Dr. Kelly Goonan from Southern Utah University would be a great person to fill that. So Kelly, why don't you just take a minute and just kind of introduce yourself, your background to the commission members. You'll probably want to use that.
Okay, I can usually use my professor, but I don't know sometimes with mics. Yeah, I'm Kelly Goonan. I'm the program director of the Outdoor Recreation and Parks and Tourism degree program down at Southern Utah University. I kind of call myself a hybrid recreation ecologist, recreation social scientist. Chris Mons actually taught me Intro to Environmental Studies when I was a freshman at St. Lawrence University, so that's the short version of how I ended up in Utah. I did my doctorate at Utah State University, moved to Utah in 2009 for that, and then I've been at SUU since 2014. I've had the opportunity recently to work with Tara on the Zion Regional Recreation Management Planning Initiative down there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to working with everyone on the commission.
Great, welcome. I'd like to mention too that one of the things that I thought was very interesting in your academic emphasis is on the experience of recreationalists and enhancing their experiences. And I thought that was very germane to what we're trying to do here on this commission and trying to focus on enhancing experiences for those recreating on our amazing outdoors.
Yeah, and maybe I can give a little bit more really brief. I kind of describe myself as a hybrid recreation ecologist, recreation social scientist. So through my academic training, I studied both the biophysical impacts of recreation activities on landscapes, but then also the visitor experience side and how we hopefully minimize the biophysical impacts and enhance the recreational experiential benefits to people, and how we try to balance all of that and manage that. So I guess that's a little bit more about kind of my area of expertise, if you will.
Great. Well, again, welcome. I don't have an agenda in front of us. Okay. All right. I've got one here. Okay. So the next item that we'll have is right off the bat is if we have any members of the public here or online that would like to give public comment. I don't know if I don't know that I don't see any here currently in the room. I don't know that we have any members of the public online. So seeing none, we'll close the public comment period, move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on R651-410-1, safety flags required on designated sand dunes. Chase, what's this one about? Explain this to us.
Yeah, so our safety flags that are required on 3 of our designated sand dunes, which are defined by us as an agency. We've defined 3 traditionally sand dunes areas that require safety flags. And so we're holding true to, there hasn't been any development of new sand dunes in Utah. So we're going to hold true with our coral pink sand dunes, Little Sahara recreation area, as well as it's called Big Sand Mountain Recreation Management, but that's our Sand Hollow area down in Washington County, where you'd be required to have a flag while operating an OHV there. So we We had no public comments in the past years as far as I'm aware of, and I couldn't find any. And so we re-upped that for another 5 years administratively. So we're just here to advise the commission that we did that, and Pitt agreed to move forward, and we shot it on up to our department level on that. So
And so the reason why this is on our agenda for this commission, do we need to ratify or approve that rule
No.
change or anything? Or,
No,
or is this
we're-
informational only?
yeah, it's just
Okay.
we're here to advise the commission that it has. I mean, if there's any conversations about it, we can answer to that. But as a division, we've moved forward with because it didn't change anything. We're just here to advise the commission of that.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I'll just add, there's a lot of things that you'll be seeing this with the change at the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1. A lot of the changes that took place with the new division are that we have to advise the Outdoor Adventure Commission on things, but they're not a voting body. They're not running as a board for the division or a decision-making body. But it is required that when we make changes to rules or statute or grants, especially allocation or of money in the grant programs or things like that, we have to advise the commission on that, and we can open up for discussion. But most of that is just so we keep everybody on the commission aware of what's going on kind of the more administrative and day-to-day a little bit as we start to formulate a plan and make decisions, bigger picture for the state moving forward. We want to make sure we don't forget to mention, oh, we already invested in this, or money's going this way, or this is what the laws and the statutes say, or the rules, or anything like that. So for the most part, put it in the back of your head, remember, take a note, and then we can move on for that.
Okay. All right, thanks. Do we have any questions or comments on this item? I don't see any online either, so, all right. Thank you very much, Chase, for that. All right, we'll go to the next item on our agenda, which is an update on the strategic planning process from Dr. Smith.
Great.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you, Representative Stanquist. Let me go ahead and get my screen share here, and then Patrick, do you think I can do that? Okay. Thanks, Patrick. Well, really the main purpose for today is to kind of give everyone an update with where we are in constructing the recreation asset database for the state, and then review some of the process and objectives for the workshops that we'll have starting launching up early next month. So we're kind of at the last point as a thing together, informing the commission of what that process is going to look like before we jump into those meetings starting the first week of August. I'm going to go a little bit out of order with what's in the agenda. Just think it makes more sense to talk about where we're at with this recreation asset database first. Kind of give you a quick look at what that looks like now, where we are in constructing it, and then we'll talk about the workshops and some of the specific processes for getting data and information out of those workshops to start to prioritize some potential projects and across these different regions. So as you maybe recall from, I think, our meeting at the beginning of May, we looked over all these different recreational assets that we could possibly collect information on for the entire state. And this is a revised version of what we had initially prepared for the commission, with the specific types of recreational assets by whether or not they're water or land based, and then typically types of distinct types of infrastructure. Most of these pieces of infrastructure or these types of infrastructure, we've been able to compile data on for the entire state so far in one form or another. It's coming from a variety of different data sources, mostly from either federal agency partners or from states' existing databases, the state's trail database, which we do have an authoritative trails database that's compiled for the state already that we've leaned on. And then we've tiered it to some other open access, publicly produced data sets that are available to really compile this first set, what we consider our first cut of information. So for all of the different types of recreational assets that you see up here now, we have data for the entire state. It's not vetted yet, and that's really what one of the major purposes of the workshops will be, is to go through the process of having the regional workshop stakeholders tell us what we do have missing, what's still missing, or if there's something that is in the database now that shouldn't be in the database. But just to give you an idea of the specific types of assets that we're looking at and that we have compiled so far, this is the more up-to-date list. Some big updates on what we have added here that we didn't have in before. We didn't have the climbing routes in there before, and we didn't have connections to public transportation, and we didn't have the different breakouts between motorized and non-motorized travel. So, between automobile primary, unmotorized travel, primary automobile, motorized travel. So basically, off-highway vehicle use that's anything besides a single track, and then non-automobile motorized, which is basically single track off-highway vehicle use. So we do have those broken out. Things that we aren't able to capture in the database is different types of allowable uses on trails so far. So we won't have information on where mountain biking is allowed with pedestrian use, or where it's just pedestrian use, or equestrian use is also a considered use. That's something that we'll probably not be able to get at with the workshops either, given just the geographic scope of these 7 different regions that we're looking at across the state. So maybe that's a good point to think of for like stage 2 of the development of this recreational asset database. But this is what we're able to compile. It's more of like we're trying to get down to the finest level of resolution that we can. But this is probably the extent of the assets that we could really quantify in any specific detail across the entire state. Any thoughts or considerations there? Anything that might be missing that we would want to specifically target? Yeah, Pitt.
Just a question on campsites, primitive versus developed. That definition by like amenities that are available. So a Forest Service established, but it's a primitive campsite because there's no electric or sewer hookups, right? It's a toilet and a water spigot. That's primitive, I'm guessing. How are you dividing that up?
We're primarily dividing it by access. If it's a backcountry hike-in only site, that's what we're considering the primitive sites. And then if it's accessible by vehicle, then it's a site. For some of those, we do have tiers, like the state parks. We do have good information on a number of like RV hookups if it's an RV accessible site. But that's another one where, like the mountain bike access, we don't have that level of detail consistently across the entire state.
So what about BLM land? That, a lot of times they'll just designate a parcel that says this is dispersed camping.
Yeah.
Is that counting them? I mean, it's hard to count then a number of available sites or whatever because it's dispersed, right?
Yeah, and that would be considered a developed campground or one that's accessible.
Yeah.
But not one that that has any established hookups or established infrastructure on site.
But you will break down those developed
where that information
tiers,
where that information is available, but that's one that at least consistently across the entire state we probably won't be able to get to that level of at least granularity.
Sorry, one more question about that. Would that include private campgrounds, like
Yeah,
a,
that's-
like a
that's-
KOA or a.
Yeah, and that's really been easy to do. So we do have all the developed private campgrounds as well. Yeah, and that's been I guess another point of connection with what we might be able to do. This data set, I had a conversation with Jeff Rasmussen, Director of State Parks, about fees on state park campgrounds versus fees on private campgrounds and the comparability of those different, resources, those different types of campgrounds, and whether or not the state was being competitively priced. We're not going to be able to look at the actual fee cost for private campgrounds, but again, that's a point. We'll have at least a more comprehensive list of what those private campgrounds are. So a good point of junction into this data set that it highlights another way that it can be used if we wanted to go back in and look at fee structures for private campgrounds, or fee structures for any other asset that might not be a state asset that we'd want to then compare to the state resources.
I want to know. I don't know how many campsites there are overall, because I think it'd be, and I don't think we're probably to that point. Vic, you might know, but it'd be a cool thing to say. The state of Utah has more campsites than hotel rooms, like in the state, right? Like it'd just be a cool bragging feature of how wild Utah is.
More about that.
So this is the current updated list. I wanted to just kind of quickly jump into the example of what it looks like now.
We have a quick question.
Oh, sorry, Kelly. Yeah.
Previous slide. Just a couple quick thoughts. I did read through the minutes from last time, and I noticed that there was a little bit of discussion about backcountry skiing. I don't know if there's any way to kind of capture some of that, but with climbing, I might suggest adding climbing and canyoneering routes, because at least down in southern Utah, that's a really significant activity that we're seeing a lot of growth in. And we also know that people are traveling from outside of the state to Utah to participate in that specific activity. And there's a lot of information. I think most of it at this point is available through kind of like the user created resources like Blue Gnome and kind of the online forums and things like that, but maybe trying to capture some of the canyoneering, because I know a lot of times they're accessing and exiting the canyon from different points. And so that's something that might show up in the inventory as well as an additional land-based kind of more activity focus that you could add. And you could probably add it to like a climbing / canyoneering, unless you did want to separate them out.
Okay.
Agreed. It's a very unique Utah activity. Canyoneering isn't happening at high levels in most other states. Utah, right?
Yeah.
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 Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most often, a lot of those locations are just it's one area that there's multiple routes within. Yeah.
I just missed
Yeah, ski. The back. I totally agree with the canyoneering. I'm starting to get into a little bit of canyoneering myself. So I can see it's just exploding, and it's a huge hotspot. Utah's a fantastic place for that. But then also the backcountry skiing, I think, is a really good example, since it's pretty easy to quantify a developed ski resort. But the backcountry skiing is much more dispersed, but it's still certainly has a lot of the same characteristics in terms of parking access and an activity that's happening on public lands and things like that. So that's a good point.
What would you inventory though in
Yeah, yeah.
backcountry skiing? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't inventory runs.
Or snowshoeing, because maybe there's not necessarily like an established trail. There's popular routes in the winter times, but
backcountry skiers do use summer trailheads typically as their jumping off point. They don't follow the summer trail necessarily, but a lot of times that's where the parking is and it's used.
Yeah.
So I don't know, tying it into trailhead, but again, that's really hard to inventory, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's
what
a good point,
assets of
yeah,
backcountry skiing?
what's the asset there? It's a mountain covered in snow and people are going all over the place, right?
Yeah. I would say that getting the total acres of backcountry skiable terrain would be probably easy to do because most of that is from travel management plans within the federal agencies. Or service travel management plans have that spatial data. But the other thing that would probably be more interesting and more useful for the state would be access points, which would be like pull-offs and existing trailheads on state roads. That would probably require us to go have really detailed conversations with the backcountry skiers groups to actually get that data. So
There's probably a parallel there too, also with like OHV trails and access points with snowmobiling in the wintertime, where maybe they're using the same access points. The routes and the trails are different in the winter with snowmobiles and OHVs. Yeah.
I think we're seeing an increase in that shared use system as well as like the use of snowmobiles to get to these backcountry areas. I know I haven't really been involved in backcountry skiing, but from my experience out in the field, we are seeing that they're utilizing the snowmobiles to get to their ski slope in the backcountry, as you will, and maybe it can advise a little bit more on that on how they access it. They are using those like shared trailheads. We're seeing a lot of ski hookups to these snowmobiles. That's where the industry's making those available specifically with Skidoo. So I see you're seeing a lot of commonalities there. Now, as far as them accessing back there, if that's the only way they're doing it, or if they're getting out other ways, then that's what I don't know as far as all the ways of getting out there. But I do know snowmobile is a big vessel for their access.
So we'll look into some of those key issues, the backcountry access and the shared use as a specific area or as a specific way that we can categorize these different assets. But I think some of those might take a little bit longer because they'll probably really require us to sit down with those specific user groups and maybe multiple user groups across the state that have access to that information.
Well, like you said, maybe the best way to inventory it or show the assets is to say, and it might be a difficult to find all the access points, but to get an idea of trailheads, say there's X amount of trailheads to access X amount of skiable acres, right, in Utah. And that's not too granular, but it's a kind of a big picture. Say, just to compare those two numbers would be interesting. So we don't say like, well, we have, millions of acres of skiable mountains, but we have 3 access points. Like,
yeah,
obviously then that's a problem, right? And then so maybe but I still don't know how it compares or comprehend what it means. Even if we say we've got 200 access points, does that mean to millions of skiable acres? I don't know what decisions you can pull from that anyway, right?
Yeah.
As far as investment and growth and everything else.
Yeah. The existing trailheads would be easy to do. It's all the other access points, just the roadside pull-offs that would take a long time to kind of pull together. But we can see if there's any of those user groups that would have any of that information ready to go, or if they would be willing to sit down with us and pull some of that together.
Yeah, we did have, as a matter of fact, with the grant, we had a request to develop basically a trailhead / parking lot for snowmobile use out near Cedar Creek. So it's a multi-million-dollar with $2.5 million. That's Worth County. So.
Yeah.
But it seems like it might be.
Yeah. It might just take a little bit of time. We're probably not gonna have it ready to go for the workshops, but
maybe the local. Those things.
Yeah.
And definitely the hotspots, you can probably get the data pretty quick. I mean, Wasatch Front, right? The Wasatch Backcountry Alliance, they may already have a lot of that data. It's gonna be a lot harder to figure out all the backcountry access in Open Canyon or the Uintas or something like that, right? Where it's a lot smaller community where there's already advocacy groups and people working to protect access in the Wasatch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that right now a census is necessarily necessary, but having information about those major access points, because it is a significant winter recreation activity, and winter recreation outside of resorts tends to be kind of understudied and understood. But we know that, based on sales and all kinds of other things, that we're seeing an increase, especially after COVID. We saw more people go into the backcountry because resorts had restrictions and things like that. So that's just why I was asking, because it's fairly easy to get snowmobile information because we've got the designated routes, which are already on there. But some of those non-motorized activities where people can just pull off the side of the road and get out and go anywhere are certainly more challenging to quantify. But if we're able to identify some of those major areas where, like, what are the main areas in the Tushers that people are going to? What are the main areas in the Wasatch Front or the Bear River Range up in Cache Valley that we know people are participating in these activities? Because if the goal is eventually to start using this strategic plan to look at assets and look at development and prioritize funding and maybe some of those other support services, then having that information will kind of, or even just being able to identify those gaps. Say we know that it's happening, we weren't able to capture it at a future stage. Would we be able to better, kind of get some of this information?
Tom, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think if we're just trying to capture the main locations, the Utah Avalanche Center and BCA have partnered with the Forest Service in lots of places to put up those, check your beacon before you go. And I think that's becoming the norm at the main hotspots where people are accessing the backcountry. Of course, we have them in the Lascelles and all through the Wasatch. I'm not sure if there's much in Cache County, but I think that would be a good starting point to capture the major spots. And I think as a group, we could probably fill in with some of the ones that might be missing. So food for thought.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can start there and reach out to some of those groups and sit down with them. So just to give everyone an idea of where we're going now with the construction of the data set, here's all the data in an open and publicly available data set that we're currently working with different county or federal and state agencies to go through the specific resources in the region, starting off with our first region, kind of the northeastern corner of the state, walking through and validating some of these data points before we get to the workshop early next month, so that we can expedite that process of validating a lot of this data on site and not spending a lot of valuable time in those workshops of just making sure that we have the right resources on the ground, because we do want to spend the bulk of that workshop really trying to identify threats to the resources that we do already have mapped out. So this is kind of where we're at now. We're working through this in a really systematic and logical process, really following the directions of the workshops across the state. So we're spending most of our time in personal connections or connections with the local stakeholders in the pattern or in the format of the regions that we're working through now, spending most of the time over the next month with a group in the Northeast, up around Vernal, and then we'll kind of move throughout the rest of the state as we roll through the rest of the workshops. So we're not trying to bite off too much at once. Again, most of this will all be publicly available by the time we get to that first workshop, and will be information that we'll be able to share with those stakeholders after the fact and ask them to share any information from us with us about any assets that they might have good data on that we don't have at the time of the workshop.
I just shout at you from.
I think we've got a couple on, yeah.
I'd still love to get the workshops into the agencies. That's going to be one of our best groups. Voter right, non-voter right. So they're on notice as soon as they have.
did that and it was dangerous. Okay. Anyway, so they're on notice to put it into one of their Friday newsletters as soon as they have a blurb or a PDF or something to put in.
Okay, I'll follow up with you, Kate, make sure we get that out ASAP.
Well, and I think there was at least one date, I think we mentioned this, that one of the dates conflicted with one of the legislative interim days. And as I thought about it, that's not necessarily just an issue for me, but also there are a lot of local officials, staff members that also travel to interim days that we would maybe otherwise want to be attending the workshops, including, I would like to make sure that when we have a workshop in a particular area, that we also invite legislators from that area to attend. But you might have county commissioners or council members or staff members that we would want to have there too, and that might be a conflict if they've got meetings around interim days, things like that. So we might want to move. I think the one in Green River is the one that conflicted with an interim day. I know that some of the others, like there was one that was kind of maybe the day before, day after the league conference, and two that were like the day before and the day after the One Utah Summit. I think, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those may be okay to leave where they are. But the one that was on the interim day, we might want to just find a different date for that.
Okay. Just to jump into the scope of the regional workshops, to remind everybody, or if you weren't here before, to give you a refresher, what we really want to achieve is first a validation of the assets that we have compiled in the recreational asset database, and then a comprehensive understanding of what existing threats there are to those assets. The idea that those identified threats, can be used to prioritize specific projects that address those threats or meet the needs that we have identified. So the fall 2022 workshops, or summer and fall 2022 workshops, are really focused on that process of identifying what's on the ground, what are the biggest threats to the existing resources that we have, and what projects might fill those needs, and specifically getting ideas from local stakeholders about what the unique vision for outdoor recreation they have for the unique vision for outdoor recreation within their own region. And then the summer workshops, spring and summer workshops next year, will really focus much more on sustainable funding models and ways that outdoor recreation could be managed in a long-term in a long-term way, more sustainably. So it's more about the assets this summer and fall, and more about funding and maintaining assets in the spring. So the process that we have for these workshops really does focus on this process of data validation, and then walking individuals through a process of having them think through and creatively identify what the unique vision and value is for their region as a unique region, a relatively unique region across the state, which assets should be seen as opportunities to leverage, where visitation needs to be drawn away from, where we have existing demand that's not being met, and where there's current resources that are being threatened by either an environmental, social, or managerial threat. So I wanted to kind of walk you through the process so you can kind of see the method that we have thought about for identifying the specific projects or the specific needs that need to be met with recommendations from the Outdoor Adventure Commission this year. And it might dovetail nicely into the discussion that we have a little bit later about the ways that the Outdoor Adventure Commission prioritizes projects on a more ongoing or continual basis. So we had talked about having regional workshop stakeholders go through this threat assessment, where we give them the definitions of potential threats to recreational assets, these environmental, social, and managerial threats that really can identify everything from access issues to known conflict issues to environmental threats, water levels, drought, to wildfire, and social conflicts like crowding and conflict. So the process that we've identified for the workshops is we'll have the maps of the data that has been compiled in the recreational asset database laid out for stakeholder participants to look at. And they'll all have a specific number of sticky dots that they'll go through that have specific meanings or they're tied to one of these distinct threats. So I just threw these up here so you can kind of see, like for example, the red dot would be for an environmental threat to that particular resource, yellow triangle for a social threat, existing conflict issues or capacity issues, and then a managerial threat might be a different symbol. But the process will be individuals will have a set number of these markers that they have to allocate across the entire region. We're putting them in a unique situation of having to make some specific trade-offs of what are the biggest environmental threats to recreational assets across this region, and what are the biggest social threats to recreational assets across this region, and then having them place those dots that represent their particular interest and their perspective across that specific region. So we're asking them implicitly to prioritize where they think the biggest threats are to the region. This allows us to map out, once we have hundreds of dots across all of the stakeholders that are being placed out across the maps, where there are hotspots of known conflict or where there are hotspots of access issues. So this is the area just above Vernal. Kind of see Red Fleet State Park and Steinecker right there. But this is just to give an example or an illustrative example of what the results would look like, or what the end result of this first set of workshops can look like, to see, well, here's where all of the environmental threats are. All of our reservoirs may be as a big threat to the water level issues and to drought issues. All of our off-highway vehicle trails, or certain areas of off-highway vehicle trails, might be at a bigger risk to known conflict issues. We'll have a way to specifically prioritize and rank different assets across that entire region, because everyone will have the same ability to place specific threats across that entire landscape. So the idea is that they'll map out these, we'll have discussions that are focused on spatial concentration of where those threats are, the specific reasons why people think that there's a threat to those specific assets, and try to get some of that more useful qualitative information from them. So the ultimate idea is that we can get to a table like this, or a ranking or prioritization list, where we have a specific location, like Red Fleet State Park might be one specific area. And here's the score for the environmental threats to that specific recreational asset. Here's the specific score for the social threats to that particular asset, and here's the score for that particular managerial threats to that particular asset. And those are the areas that have a known need, or the stakeholders identify as a known need. And so we're able to quantify at least a consistent, transparent way across the entire state where these known issues, these known threats are to our state's recreational assets. So we'll have quantifiable metrics that we can say, these are the total threats across the entire region. The areas that receive the most points, or the highest score, are the areas that most likely be the areas of critical concern, should be prioritized project-specific recommendations. So does that process make sense as far as walking stakeholders through a deliberate process of allocating scarce resources or allocating scarce concerns across recreational assets within the region? Again, the ultimate motivation here is have a transparent, consistent process that we can walk through the entire state.
So I think this was mentioned at our last meeting as well. Going back to your last slide, you had sort of blank boxes for how, from these threat assessments, that we would come up with various solutions to that. And so I'm looking for, where the opportunity comes in to specify opportunities. And I could see that from this, you could say, well, we have an overuse here. There's obviously a lot of user interest, growing interest in this particular activity. And there's So, which is resulting in an overuse, perhaps, that's resulting in social or environmental threats in a particular area. And so maybe a potential solution is to develop additional assets, spread that user visitation around. That could be a potential solution to that. And we can go about it that way. I think if we're thinking about it in those terms and looking for that, but it is a little bit of a roundabout way of trying to identify opportunities. It's kind of an after effect of where we see the threats, and the threats may not necessarily manifest themselves in that way, because there might be an opportunity. There may be a high user interest that we could that we could see come out of this saying, oh, there's a lot of use, which is resulting in overuse in particular areas. And so maybe we need to, develop additional assets, but there may be opportunities that could be, and I'm hoping to hear in these regional workshops, some of the local people saying, hey, we're looking for an economic development opportunity, for example, and we've got this great area over here that could be utilized if we only had a trailhead or something like that. And so or maybe they have a vision for creating a trail system that currently does not exist, that they could see as both an amenity for their local residents, but maybe a potential economic development opportunity. I'm thinking about like the trail systems that they've started to develop in Richfield. That's a great amenity, and has started to attract people from outside the region as well. And so that's the thing that in this model, I'm looking for, how does that exploration fit into this model, and how do we identify and raise those types of things up, that where I think Richfield is a great example. East of town, it's just some mountains, and but there was an opportunity to build a trail system, and so it was just raw land. And so how can we say, okay, here's some land that could have the potential for a use, and it could be an off-road vehicle trails or other types of things that we might want to identify. So that's the thing that maybe I'm kind of wondering how that fits into this model.
I think we can also offer the opportunities to think about opportunities that don't solve existing threats. Kind of what are the solutions that don't meet existing problems, and integrate that into the workshop. I think we've tried to do that. If I can go back to the slide of asking individuals to think about what surprised them about. We kind of lay out their existing data for existing assets. What surprised them? They might say, well, we don't have as many resources as we possibly could, given the amount of land that we have access to, or the amount of resources that we have. And what should they capitalize on, or what aspects of that region should they capitalize on? And it might be a largely undeveloped nature, or a large section of their county or their region they see as undeveloped. We can specifically prompt them to think about, we're not only talking about existing recreational assets, but also potential recreational opportunities that might not be manifested, already on the ground. But what are those assets, those undeveloped assets that could be? So I think we could do that in a couple different ways. We could either do it through like a very similar process to identifying threats, having individuals go through and identify those specific locations, or we could have it be more of a creative discussion. I think we've kind of framed it so far as, well, what do you really want to emphasize as far as the outdoor recreation development potential for your particular region? And I think that a lot of those discussions, a lot of those points will come up organically if they're like, well, we know we have this amazing amount of open county land or land that's available. It hasn't been developed, or hasn't been able to be developed in the way that would really make it beneficial for local communities. I think a lot of those discussions would really kind of come up when we're talking about what needs to be emphasized, what needs to be advocated for as a local outdoor recreation asset that's not currently.
And hopefully we can prompt some of those discussions and understand what are your goals? What are your vision for this area? What are you trying to accomplish? And maybe they have that, or maybe they've thought through it. Maybe it's, there might be some of that in there, or it may prompt some of that discussion.
Yeah.
Jordan, can I add that? I think that to the question, the second follow-up meeting is much more aspirational, much more visionary. We discuss this as what is the foundation you start with? That's what do we have? What ground truth in that, and then what are people feeling the pressure about? And that being a springboard for the aspirational things would be a follow-up meeting, so that it's not, people tend to rush to solution without understanding the problem most times. So the kind of logic train is to build with challenges and then move through into solutions in the follow-up meeting. That helps kind of contextualize the process.
That does actually. That's a very good clarification. Vicky, do you have a comment?
That maybe this is a first part of the presentation. I also want to give some ahas about what's going on in their region compared to a nearby region. They can start to see the missing pieces on trails and so forth. Part of your overview.
Yeah, that's a great point, Vicki. We're going to summarize a lot of these statistics that come from the recreational asset database of like number of campgrounds within the region, even break it down like by specific county, so the county representatives have a vested interest in their just their county can see how they stack up relative to the rest of the region, and then also relative to the rest of the state. So we'll pull out some of those that are more meaningful to present to individuals, present to the stakeholders. Some of those really distinct patterns where how a particular region differs from the rest of the state. But we will have a whole list of comparative statistics to kind of share with people if they're interested. So yeah, that's really going to guide the discussion. Like, what really surprised you about this, and then hopefully go from there. What is your vision for outdoor recreation for this particular region, and how are the outdoor recreation assets on the ground now threatened? And from that, what projects meet those, solve those existing threats?
Because if there's something that we all experience, challenge of getting everyone to think boundaries. So this could be really wonderful exercise.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I may also add that our role at the state level really is to sort of help these regional plans and identify the hotspots and be a support. But really, it's the local areas that I think are going to drive a lot of the vision and then future ownership and maintenance of whatever assets are there and future ones that are developed as well.
So the logic behind this process of going through and identifying existing threats and ranking them in a consistent and transparent way, identifying scores for specific recreational assets, will ultimately allow us to identify specific areas, even specific areas within state-managed resources, like specific boat ramps or access points, that we can then put on a list of, well, what do you actually have to do to solve that problem? That might be simple, just maintenance and management. You just need a new boat ramp, like the boat ramp is too short or can't get people actually into the water. So some of those problems are relatively easy to solve if they're straightforward. And we can identify then what is the existing policy or financial mechanisms that are in place within the state, whether it's a FIG grant for off-highway vehicle issues or Office of Outdoor Recreation, say that anymore, that outdoor recreation grant that would fund a solution to that project. So we can kind of prioritize the existing solutions to that, or the existing financial mechanisms that could solve that particular problem. And then hopefully I would imagine there's going to be a laundry list of those we identify. And then there's going to be probably a very short list of bigger scale projects that are regional in nature, across jurisdictional boundaries. That would probably be a much would be ripe for discussion amongst the Outdoor Adventure Commission for the long-term strategic plan. If we had a specific investment or statewide focus on this particular asset or this particular type of asset, then we could really move the needle across all the regions as far as alleviating overcrowding issues or providing better outdoor recreation. So that's the ultimate goal here, is that we can have a ranking system where we can say, all these ones that are relatively small or that don't have, that are fairly simple, fairly straightforward, might be financial mechanisms in place for those to be already addressed with. And then these other bigger scale issues come back to the Outdoor Adventure Commission for larger discussions, because I think those are the things that we'd really want to prioritize, is going to the state legislature and saying, this is, we're not really looking for funding for 100 new trailheads across the entire state. We're looking for large capital improvement projects or capital investment projects that are really going to change outdoor recreation in the state. So that's kind of where our thinking is going. Hopefully that reflects what the vision is for outdoor recreation development projects that are supported by the Outdoor Adventure Commission. They're these larger kind of statewide efforts or regional efforts that really get beyond existing financial or policy solutions.
Yeah, that sounds good.
The last one last thing I wanted to mention about the workshops, we have already kind of sent invites for some of our stakeholders in the Northeast region, in areas, like I said, around Vernal, for the groups that we have talked with already. And after this meeting, we'll share that list with the Outdoor Adventure Commission. So if you have anybody that you would specifically want invited and included in those lists for any of the regions kind of coming up, you can add them directly in the same way that you signed up for the workshop so far. So just to give you the opportunity to like specifically put people that you want represented at these workshops. But we do have all the outdoor recreation leads from the state and federal land management agencies on our plan to invite local and regional elected officials, so county commissioners for sure, the House reps across the entire state. Those will be individuals that will be for sure on our list. But we'll share that list of names and email contact information, and feel free to add anybody that you want. We'll reach out to them. We'll do that within the next week or so, particularly for this the upcoming workshop in August. Yeah, Pitt.
And I know we discussed this a little bit last meeting, but just to be clear, how do we make sure we get all the people we want there without the people we don't want there? You know what I mean? I mean, we don't want to open this. We don't want this to become a school board meeting. We want this to be, and not that the school board meetings are bad; they're great. But we want to make sure that we're productive and can move forward without too much interruption on some of this.
Yeah, that's a great point, and one that Jake and I have chatted with or chatted about. We have a list of advocacy-oriented interests that we're going to sit down with outside of a regional workshop, kind of walk through this exact same process with them, identifying critical threats to existing resources, so that it is an open and inclusive process, that they won't be able to participate in the public or the open discussion, the stakeholder discussion amongst each specific region. So we do want their input, and we'll reach out and kind of take the onus of sitting down with those groups one-on-one, having the discussions with them. So it just does end up being a process where,
right, because word could get out that, I mean, a well-organized group could then be at every meeting throughout the state. That could be laborious.
Yeah,
if we're dealing with that at every meeting, right?
Yeah, and that's really what our thinking is, that we can head up those with some strategic discussions first, to say, let's sit down and we'll just talk about your group's interests, and I'll align the process for them of what we're going through, and even have them walk through the exact same process so we can get that information collected and represented. So it is public and inclusive. Everybody will have access, opportunity to provide input, consideration by the commission, not excluding them from the process, but the venue will be a little bit more targeted, a little bit more directed on their particular interests.
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be opportunities for the public to comment and to provide that input. I mean, maintain our normally high levels, standards of transparency. But, we also want to be able to have a focused, productive meeting as well. So, yeah, just make sure we find the right balance there.
Yeah, and I think that was our approach. I think they're to kind of hit it off at the pass if there might be some of those issues. Reach out to those groups and have one of those discussions beforehand. All right. So as I mentioned, we'll send a follow-up email after this
I had a question for you. In
Yes,
your
okay.
outdoor recreation planners, who is in that group for you? Who are you thinking of?
Well, for the outdoor recreation planners, that it would primarily be relevant to the federal agencies who have an outdoor recreation title, outdoor recreation planner or lead. At the municipal level, kind of there will be really dependent upon the size and scale of the individual municipality. If they do have a Parks and Rec lead, it would be that person.
So
for smaller communities, that's where we're going to have
you're going to struggle
the issue.
In my experience, you're either looking at a parks department or you're potentially looking at a planner or an engineer. One option might be to include in kind of your broad land manager category. There are associations for city engineers, city parks departments, and so they have their own kind of industry group is the wrong word, but like their own little association. City managers might be another group for even smaller cities. So including those organizations, and if it's helpful, I'm happy to get a list from my city of what those professional organizations are to make sure that those people who are in that professional planning at a municipal level are included.
Yeah, that would be really helpful.
And both at the city and the county level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know how to find those county people.
No, that's me either.
Okay, so everyone has received the dates that we had lined out. If you didn't, check your email or contact me again. I think Patrick also sent it out in the agenda for today.
Looks like we're gonna have to change one of those days. 1st of September.
Yeah, that's the one that conflicts with legislative interim. It looks like, because we asked everybody to sign up on the Outdoor Adventure Commission, that we're pretty good on meeting our quota of having 2 OAC members from each of the at each of the regional workshops.
I think I signed up for almost one, so I hope it is.
I think I mentioned last time we don't have a minimum, so hopefully everybody can make it to as many as they can.
Yeah, there's no maximum. Everyone's invited to all of them.
Yeah, we don't have
if
a
you're
maximum.
able to. I'm going to try to attend all of them if possible.
Except for Shane brought up one thing about maximum. If you do have quorum, all of a sudden, we've just got to make sure that
we notice it.
And it probably wouldn't arise with the OAC at these meetings, but if there was a quorum of another public body, for example, a county commission, you still need to notice it. They would need to notice it as a non-public.
And I think maybe we leave it up to them. Like if they have, although it could be like if you just happen to have 3 out of 5 city council members show up, it could be sort of like an incidental meeting or something like that.
That's possible. And if there's not a quorum, then you don't have the issue at all.
Yeah, but then, but I think that would be kind of up to them.
action that is taken.
Right.
We have these meetings all the time where we'll have like a Wasatch Front Regional Council meeting, and you'll have 4 or 5 cities with a quorum, but because you're taking a public action.
They're not voting or anything.
Yeah, there are exceptions if you aren't taking action, but if you're assembling to undertake an official function, sometimes those exceptions won't apply under the act. So it's just something to look at. If you anticipate there might be a quorum of a public body there, you might want to review the act to ensure that it doesn't invoke the open public meetings requirement.
You know, cities, I would imagine you won't get many cities where you'll receive a full quorum, but in the 3-commission form of government, it's really easy to do that.
It's true. So do we need to notice these meetings from the commission standpoint? No.
Because it sounds like you'll just have 2 members there, and that's not enough to quorum for the outdoor adventure.
I think the biggest one right now scheduled has 5. Still
And
not
I
a quorum.
believe the statute, it's 6 as a quorum for the OAC.
Well, it might be
6 or 8?
Still, you'd be below that.
Yeah, we'd be below, so we're right.
Okay. Well,
Still need more for some, we barely have 2.
yeah, and if we move the one on the 21st, then you can add me to that one as
Yeah,
well.
most likely I'd be able to confirm there.
Yeah.
And Jeff could be there, so.
Yeah.
And the having it in Green River then is the following 3 days after is Bouldering Fest, which is the big event. And we want to have those there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so the
Okay, we'll figure this out. And there is, we did talk a little bit about, like, for commission members that want to attend, there's travel reimbursements available.
Right.
So don't let that be a hindrance.
Yeah, from the commission. Any of you that are traveling, Betty and I, that can all be reimbursed through the commission.
The last thing I wanted to mention is kind of the process of sharing results for those who are not able to make it to the workshops. Probably about 2 weeks after the workshops, we'll be able to compile all of the information, these spatial hotspots of critical threats across the entire region. A lot of that qualitative data synthesized down to major points. And that would be really region-specific recommendations or region-specific needs. And we can share that a few weeks after regional meetings take place. And then kind of those aside in kind of one list of potential of needs that might be met by specific projects or specific fiscal and policy mechanisms that are in place. Then we'd probably have another set of projects or needs that come out that keep getting added to as we walk through these workshops that are more larger scale and potentially multi-region or entire statewide. And so there'll probably be a need for the commission to have a very specific discussion towards the end of the workshops about these larger statewide investment opportunities, aside from the recommendations that come out of the individual regions, because I imagine that the commission doesn't want to have recommendations that are, here's 7 major recommendations, one from each of the 7 different regions, but here's a set of recommendations that 2 or 3 of them might be from specific regions, but there's one or two that meet needs that are identified across the state as a whole. So just to kind of give you the idea of what we envision for sharing the results of the individual workshops, and then having a more focused discussion of these bigger trends across all 7 regions towards the end of October and into November. All right, so that was all I had to share today as far as an update. Like I said, we'll share the email lists of invitees for the first workshop, which is the first week of next month, with everybody right after this meeting. And feel free to add folks. The last thing I will mention is if I haven't had a chance to chat with you one-on-one, or if we didn't connect on a specific time, I would still welcome an opportunity to do that. Again, really the focus of those is to identify your specific needs and interests that might not come out of the regional workshops, but that your interest, your group that you're representing on the Outdoor Adventure Commission is fully represented in maybe other ways that you have an opportunity to share what those concerns might be, so that we can get them addressed and integrated into either subsequent discussions amongst the commission or in the data that we're able to pull together along the way. So follow up with me if you didn't get a chance to have a one-on-one discussion. I'd be happy to do that at your convenience. So
All right, thank you very much, Jordan. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is discussion on OAC recommendation process for legislative RFAs. So, and it really kind of dovetails in very well with kind of what you were, the last portion of that you were talking about, Jordan, where out of these regional meetings, I think we would expect to see, certain projects that come out of recommendations, different opportunities that we see, or different ways to address some of the short-term needs in some of these regions. And hopefully we'll have some really good discussions and be able to identify some good opportunities. But then I think it'll be the responsibility of this commission to put together a prioritization list, something that can go as a recommendation to the legislature for potential funding in the upcoming 2023 legislative session. But that's kind of like the short-term concern, of course, is what I'm very interested in seeing this commission do is that we establish a good, thorough process for providing recommendations for funding and how we allocate our resources. That this commission has the opportunity to be the one that the body that sort of vets and looks through the details, so that then the legislature can make well-informed decisions about where to allocate resources. But this is a new process. This is, this commission hasn't been around very long, and so I think it's going to take us a little bit of time to establish a mature process. In the future, long term, I would really like to see the strategic plan that hopefully that we're planning on having ready by the end of next year becomes sort of the guiding document that can be updated on a regular basis, so that we can so that strategic plan can then say, okay, here's where these resources need to be allocated, and so that it can be so those that funding can be data-based and can really help implement the long-term strategic plan. And probably the best model that I can think of for how we might create a process for that is what we currently do with transportation, where we have lots of different regional transportation plans, and there are experts looking at growth models and looking at the data, and so that then it can come up to the transportation advisory committees that we have for the different regions. In the area of transportation, we've got 3 for the entire state. For recreation, this body would be looking at the entire state, but that's sort of the model that I'm thinking about, that we could use to create a well thought out, transparent process for prioritization of different projects, rather than having it be just a free for all of people going after money for their pet project in their particular region. That's what I'm hoping to avoid. So thoughts on that? I know that I see Terry's online. I don't know, Terry, if you've got some thoughts on how you might, you're much more understanding, you have a much more deeper understanding, for example, of that transportation process. I should know more about it since I'm on the transportation committee and IGG appropriations. But do you want to maybe share a little bit about what your thoughts are or recommendations on how we might model a process after what's done with UDOT?
Sure. If you'd like, I've got some slides I can share just to kind of give you a brief overview of what we do.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, one second. Sorry, I'm not seeing my tab that it normally gives me to share. One second, let me.
All right, now we can see that.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. There's always a difference between we're on Google, so I have a hard time switching sometimes. So just to give you just a quick overview, we do have what we call our transportation capacity project prioritization process. It's I think about an 80-page document. I'm not going to go through all of it. This is on our website under our Transportation Commission, and I can give you guys a link to it so you can look at it. But let me just kind of give you a couple highlights. Everything.
Can we get, Terry, hold on. We have a pop-up in front of your screen we need to get rid of. We can't see all your beautiful artwork. Hold on. Who's got it?
Engineers
there we go.
generally aren't accused of having beautiful artwork. So
Go ahead. We're good now.
Okay, so we worked with several of our stakeholders in the past to talk about what is it we're trying to do with transportation. Ultimately, we're trying to improve quality of life, and we're trying to do it under these 4 categories. So this is how we these are the outcomes we're going for. So then we break those outcomes. We have percentages across here, and we've done this with our Transportation Commission and gone through a process to say, what do we value the most? And when you compare all of these things, good health, strong economy, better mobility, connected communities, and we went through a comparison process and ended up with the percentages you see across the top. And then underneath each one of these categories, we have another breakdown, and we say under good health, what are some of the key things? Well, we have safety, public health, and environment. So safety, we talk a lot about crashes. Public health, we talk about, can we get people out walking, biking more to be healthy themselves? And then in terms of the environment, air quality, how we affect where our facilities go through. So we have all of these measures, and you can see each one of these has a percentage as well. And this was another comparison process we went through with our commission, our staff, and tried to figure out, first, you're trying to figure out what you value, and then we think about how we can measure. And when you put it all together in one model, here's what it looks like. So this is our breakdown of everything we measure to score and rank our projects. This gets pretty detailed, probably hard to see on your screen, but this just gives you a sense of how deep we go into this to try to figure out how we score our projects. And then this is just an example from inside the document, just to show you the level of detail it goes to. For instance, under good health, one of the measures is non-motorized safety. And so you can see under this, we are looking at the non-motorized crash history within 500 feet of the project. Projects are scored based on the total number of normalized non-motorized crashes, and then also based on a safety component index. So you can see we go quite to the level of detail here. This may be more detail than you guys want to go to in your first cut at trying to prioritize projects. It is a pretty extensive model. We use this across all the ways we prioritize projects. We have one model that we do for roadways. We have a model that we do for transit. We have a model that we do for active transportation. And then we have a model that we do for first mile, last mile active transportation. Because those 4 things are very hard to compare against each other in one model. So we do break them apart and model them separately. And then ultimately what that results in is a ranked list with all of our, and again, not expecting you to try to see the level of detail on this, but just trying to give you a big overview of what we do, ultimately results in a list like this, which we have programmed from for the last couple of years, not only from legislated projects that the legislature said spend $30 million on active transportation. We also programmed out of our TTIF and our TIF programs that we have as funding to the department. So we've been able to get quite a ways down these lists, and we think that the list represents what's important to the communities. It comes from projects that are nominated to us, as well as projects that are on a state transportation map representing what communities feel like they need to have for active transportation, as well as we did have a subset of projects that we called our regionally important list. And we talked within regions of the state and said, tell us the top 5 most important projects in your area, so that we'd also be recognizing kind of some longer projects, some more extensive things that would be kind of game changers for us as a state. So with that, that was the big quick overview of what we do with prioritization.
That's very helpful. Some of my questions for how we do this prioritization process is, one, how do projects get on the list and for consideration for prioritization? And it sounds like in the transportation arena, and I know sounds like you were specifically talking about active transportation, but I know that there's similar things for just all transportation projects, and that process is maybe a little bit more mature in the sense that it's been in place for a long time. And I think that my experience at the legislature, as we look at those transportation projects in our appropriations meetings, is I think there is a lot of deference and respect given to that prioritization process, because it is mature and well thought out, and there's well-defined criteria. And so that's really aspirationally kind of the direction that I'd like to go in with this process as well. So it entails, how, ways that projects can be put on the list. And it sounds like, you're gathering data from regional, that you might have a municipality or a county that's got some plans in place. And so you can take their plans and you can roll that in there, but also just asking them, is there something that should be considered on this list, things that are recommended. I could see a similar process happening with recreation projects. And then the other part of that is having some well-defined criteria then that you're measuring those projects against, so that you can come up with as close to an objective score as you can for those. So that was very helpful. Any thought? I'd love to hear your thoughts, or just open discussion from the commission on that. Go ahead, Terry. Did you have something?
I was just going to add that for our roadway projects, it is a little bit different process than it is for active transportation, because there is a match involved with the active transportation. So it requires somebody to put in an application in order for us to consider funding it. So that is a little bit of a complication. We also created a regional list and said, what are the big important projects? And then we were able, with the money from the legislature, to fund those with a 20% match. So we were able to suggest, here's how the projects rank. If you can come up with the 20%, we'll go ahead and fund those. The rest of the projects on the list, they were actually applications we were given. So with our roadway projects, there's no application process. We just rank everything that's in our long range plan. So those are distinctly two different ways we look at it, depending on whether there's match or not.
I think that's something as a commission we need to look at, right? And maybe kind of restating a little bit what you said, but when potential projects come about, whether from regional meetings or somebody reaches out to the commission or a community asks for an appropriation, what's the best way for the commission to recommend, this fits into an existing grant program that they should apply for, versus this is a potential regional big project that, maybe it's an appropriation out of the new restricted account that was formed or something like that, right? That's going to be probably one of the hardest steps of how we decide that without showing favoritism or, again, becoming a pet project, but say this does fit into a grant program that requires a match. We think it's a good fit for that. Any of the grant programs, depending on what the project is, and they can go that route versus this is a high enough priority that the Outdoor Adventure Commission recommends that this should be an appropriation specifically out of that restricted account because it is such a important asset for the state, or so forth, whatever it is. And that's going to be the hardest thing to evaluate those types of requests moving forward.
I did go ahead and create I made it just an application for review back in April. But I think that our team could create an application if we want.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So the first, I guess, would be, would an entity receiving funding from the restricted account, is that something the commission can authorize on its own, or does it still take approval from the legislature during the budget process?
Yeah, it has to be an appropriation from the legislature.
So I guess one of my first question would be, what guarantees do we have that if we put a process in place with some review criteria and standards that the legislature will adhere to it or take it under strong advisement, not just round file it like they do with maybe other budgets prepared by other entities? I'm directing this totally towards our legislature.
No, that is a great question, and something we just talked about last week of how do we go about that and not get circumnavigated by savvy individuals that have relationships with legislators or with committee members or with the EAC or with whoever,
legislators that have a project for their district.
I mean, I'm saying this to you. You are a lobbyist, so I'm saying, and there's another one sitting in the room here, right? So I'm not saying this is a way, but you guys know how to get that done, and there's lots of people in the state that do. So how do we make sure that?
Yeah, I would say the UDOT's process over time has become one of those that sticks,
right?
With some exceptions.
Right.
Every once in a while, someone with enough political clout adds something or shifts something, or a list changes in a conversation that no one else sees. But that one is like, in my experience, the process that is most upheld. Mm-hmm. But Terry could probably add more commentary to this, but it seems to me that it's taken some doing to insulate that process from political pressure to the extent that it has been.
Yeah, right. How many other commissions have been formed to give recommendation, but don't necessarily? Those recommendations aren't necessarily taken. I mean, that happens every session. Right?
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost is I would love maybe for our chair and vice chair to have those conversations with legislative leadership and the governor about what guidance they would give to make sure it sticks. And then I think there are any number of models. I think the UORG grant process and how you're reviewing complete applications and how they fit in. I mean, maybe that's a model to look at for a different pool of projects that don't fit that.
I would say just really large projects that were about $1 million.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of questions about that, and yeah, I certainly plan to get some clarification, and even if it was possible to put something in statute that gives it a little bit more teeth would be really good. So I will take that as an action item, something that it's already something that I'm planning on working on. But my aspiration is that we do establish some sort of a process that could be somewhat upheld. I know that it's even the current process we have with transportation funding isn't always is subject to some tweaks and some changes and things like that. But for the most part, is fairly well established. So that's my aspiration to use that as a model to go toward. Yeah.
And
If I can just chime in, I really like, I'm absolutely new to the whole budget world, so there's my caveat. But I really like UDOT's framework that they've established, and I think that's where a lot of the data that IOR is collecting will really help us, because if we look at something and say, after it's met these criteria, it's a complete application, it is for a certain dollar amount, it doesn't really fit in any of the other options available, then it comes to the commission to be kind of approved or recommended. We can look at those things like, does it address a specific high priority threat or opportunity that came out of hopefully a fairly objective data review, right? Is it something that is going to further opportunities and something that's unique in the area? Because down in Cedar City, we're very different and have very different needs, threats, and opportunities than Cache Valley or the Wasatch Front. And it might not be appropriate for us to say, when we look at those maps, like, oh, wow, our neighbors have all of this and we don't have any, so let's try to develop that. It might not make sense based on what our assets are and our geography and everything else. And so we may be able, using a lot of that data, to come back as a commission and say, what are the things that we value that we would like to support, and put together a similar framework to what UDOT has done, with some specific criteria so that it is transparent. And then when we can go and tell folks, this is why you did get approved, or this is why not, there's a little bit more. Because I think if folks understand the process and they feel that they were given a fair listen, even if they don't necessarily get what they want, they'll be more accepting of the process, and it may hopefully help to avoid some of the kind of political shifting where somebody, a representative from a region, tries to elevate a project from their local region, even if it doesn't necessarily kind of come out in that prioritization.
That's a really good point, and I think that having that good data-based framework will give that process the credibility that will really help it then, because we can always, we can educate the legislature, say, okay, here's the criteria that we've established, here's our framework, and I think some of that, I think we include as part of the strategic plan that we put together as we start thinking about these things. And then as we prioritize it and we say, that long list in tiny type that we couldn't necessarily see, but I've seen those lists before, and you can, it makes it a little bit harder then to argue against that, or at least someone has to justify why I'm taking this one down here that scored low and moving it above everything else that scored higher. At least they have to justify that, maybe in an appropriations meeting or something like that. And so if we have a good framework, I think that will help the credibility of the process quite a bit.
From a political perspective, outside of funding, there's a couple processes that stick and that ensure that you don't get a lobbying end run. A couple that come to mind, what are we calling it now? The Executive Water Task Force. I feel like I should know the official name since we're in DNR's building. But that process over many years, a water bill doesn't pass unless it's come through that committee. That took a lot of time, but part of, I think, the reason why that one works is the committee regularly meets. Occasionally, the people sitting in the chairs that have votes change places, so that makes it feel like it's fair. But it regularly meets, and people regularly bring ideas. And so when a bill comes out of that, it gets respect up at the Capitol, and good things go through. So the takeaways for me from that group is always just that it regularly meets. Anyone can bring an issue. Problems aren't just sent away. They'll continue to have groups work on them, so people feel like they make progress. One that doesn't work, and is now getting a new executive office because of it, is professional licensing. There was the OPLR committee that managed to not meet for almost 2 years, and it was supposed to be that any bill involving establishing of a new license for any profession had to have a hearing in this committee in order to become a bill, but there was no legal requirement to do so, no statutory requirement. And so people would just wait out the end of interim meetings and then propose a license for
File a bill.
hair braiding or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they never met. You could make that justification, the committee never met, and move around it. So to me, those are some of those keys. Is if you want to be the place that things have to pass through, you have to have a process, but then you have to regularly meet, regularly vet things, give people good feedback so that their project's really not quite ready. They know what they need to work on, so they don't try to just make that and run around.
Right, right. You create a good legal process so that they don't have to find alternate backdoors for it. That's very good. That's a very good
Ryan
point.
has his hand up.
Yeah, Ryan, yes.
Just, I think you guys have covered most of it, but just one more piece of advice when you do come up with your recommendations, if you can provide some sort of summary statistics that make it clear that everybody's getting their fair share, and if not, a clear explanation, why this county's projects aren't on there, that they didn't apply, whatever it is, just so legislators can quickly see, okay, my area is not being treated unfairly. It'll go a long way.
Very good point. Thank you very much. And I think it will take us time to establish a process like that and start putting some of these things in place, come up with criteria, all that kind of stuff. For this year and the recommendations for this upcoming legislative session, I think we're probably going to be a little bit more ad hoc in our process. And so as Pitt and I had chatted about this briefly last week, I think for this year, we'll probably just do our best with the feedback that we get from these regional workshops to come up with some sort of a recommendation list for the legislature for this year. But then for future years, hopefully we can develop that more established process through this. So recognize that this year might be a little bit different, but hopefully it gets better over time. But give this some thought to what that process might be, and then we can have further discussion about it and refine this in future meetings. But I just wanted to introduce that idea.
Maybe one suggestion I have, and maybe Jordan can add this to these regional meetings, is that maybe we do need, I don't know if it's maybe an application, really simple application, but after the regional meetings, we can say, hey, if you have any shovel-ready projects that you want us to look at, please submit it through this form by X date. Yeah. So then as a commission, we can look at this. And we don't have to look at all of them, right? From there, we can have our team go through and kind of vet and say, all right, these are automatically easy fits into UORG or FIG or whatever, and let them know and say, thank you for submitting. Here's information about grants that you might fit. But the couple that maybe rise that the commission needs to look at, we can do that. But using the regional meetings to take a few minutes to educate and say, hey, if you want to submit, here's the form to submit. I just don't want anybody, and maybe I'm just kind of self-preservation, I don't want to get emails from county commissioners or something. They're like, I have a project, let's talk about it off the record type of thing, right? I want it to be a little more formal than that if they are submitting and we're going to review them, because I don't want to look like I'm bringing forth projects that I'm interested in because somebody called me or called you or, called their friend on the commission. So
agreed.
And we could do like a simple application form, but at least using those regional meetings to say, hey, by X date, if you want us to consider a potential project or to review a project and potential funding sources for that, please submit it through this form or something like that.
Sorry, I don't know if this is too off topic, but one thing that might be worth looking at for an application is, because I know that some require matches, but to ask specifically about a long-term maintenance plan, because if that's not already included in there, I don't know if maybe it is. Because that's really important, and people get really excited about the new stuff, and then
it's a big question.
They
on all
forget
our grants,
to maintain
right?
it. So
because that's always the unknown. Do we were real excited about the initial capital investment, and then 5 years later, we're like, how's that mountain bike park? And they're like, oh yeah, we made a mountain bike park. That's
There's cracks in that bike path, and they have to be filled in, and it's erosion.
Signage needs to be replaced, and whatever. So it is a big part of the evaluation of the grant program, but of course, moving forward as well, in any project that's funded, whether it's through a grant or through appropriation, that's a huge question, because we don't want to give money to something that's going to get abandoned.
Well, and it's also just, if they come asking for $1 million 1 year to build it, and then a few years down the road, they're coming and asking for another $1 million to go back and fix or do maintenance, that doesn't seem like a really good model. And then it could potentially cause some of those issues where, like, well, you already funded this project, and so
the reality is the state is paying for the build and to maintain ongoing, then it should be a state asset, not a community asset, right? But we're not necessarily looking to up our state assets in recreation. We want the community to take ownership over it and have it and manage it. And
at least where it makes sense.
So,
Great. Well, any further discussion or comments on that topic? Well, if not, that's our final item on our agenda. So if there's no further comments, I'll take a final motion. All right, Vicky moves to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you so much. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.